everyone, I'm Meetsahone, and it is Friday, and that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. The full spoiler and the set release of Guilds of Ravnica are just around the corner, and as a result, I'm going to spend the next few MTG Top 10s looking at the cards that have made the biggest impact on competitive Magic for each of the guilds represented in Guilds of Ravnica, and today we're starting with Selesnya. To be eligible for this list, a card did not have to actually be from a Ravnica set, but a card needed to have a color identity of green-white, the same as the Selesnya. I did exclude lands, so like Temple Garden and the Selesnya Bounce Land aren't going to make the list because they would just be number 1 and 2, and we wouldn't get to talk about as many cards. But other than that, they have to have a color identity of Selesnya. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how I score these. Pro Tour Top 8s, Vintage, and Legacy Championship Top 8s are worth 2 points, and Grand Prix Top 8s are worth 1 point. Let's get started at number 10, where, fittingly enough, we have Selesnya Charm. Modal cards are always good for the obvious reason that they give you flexibility. Everything this card can do is very nice, making a 2/2 Vigilance creature at instant speed, pumping a creature to win in combat, or exiling a big creature are all nice options for 2 mana, and that's why this charm has managed to see enough play to make this list. It saw play in both block and standard in Selesnya aggro decks. In standard, it also appeared in Ban Hexproof, Naya, and Tokens. It hasn't seen play anywhere since 2014 though, and I think it's safe to say some cards in Guilds of Ravnica will probably push it off this list. At number 9, we have an angel with a green-white color identity, and that is Sigarda, Host of Herons. In addition to being a 5-mana 5/5 flyer, Sigarda is one of the most difficult to kill creatures around. Her hexproof prevents spot removal from working, and her other text keeps edict effects from getting rid of her. You need something that does damage or destroys the whole board, or she isn't going down. As a result, she has been a great finisher for many green-white decks over the years. She saw play in both Selesnya and Naya aggro decks in her block format and in standard, where she appeared alongside Selesnya Charm, which she also did in Bant Hexproof and Selesnya Tokens. Overall, though, she didn't do as well in Standard as the Charm. However, she's seen a lot of play in Modern. First, in Birthing Pod decks, where she could be tutored into if you needed a win condition other than your combo, and in Descendants of Birthing Pod decks, toolbox decks that use either Collected Company or Court of Calling in place of Birthing Pod. In fact, a lot of the cards on this list have seen play in Birthing Pod decks at one time or another, so keep that in mind. Earlier this year, 2018, she picked up her first Grand Prix Top 8 in a Legacy deck, showing up in the sideboard of a Maverick deck at Grand Prix Seattle, which could be a sign of more things to come for her in that format. At number 8, we have the only card on the list from the original Ravnica set, and that's Loxodon Hierarch. At the time, Hierarch was a very pushed creature, doing well in the vanilla test, gaining you life, and having the ability to regenerate your whole board in a pinch. The original Ravnica was a set where creatures really got pushed, especially gold ones, and Loxodon Hierarch is pretty good evidence of that. In Standard, it saw play in a deck called Ghazi Glare, a card that utilized a Selesnya enchantment called Glare of Subdual, which could be used to lock down the opponent's board. This deck was pretty dominant at Worlds in 2005, putting up 5 top 8s at the event. Extended is where it did the most work, though, showing up in Zoo decks. Extended is where it did the most, though, showing up in Zoo aggro decks. Naya decks that ran a bunch of creatures with creature types that you might expect to see in a zoo, like the elephant here. There was also a wolf, an ape, and so on. It also saw play in Doran the Siege Tower and Dredge decks. It has 1 Grand Prix Top 8 each in Modern and in Legacy, the one in Modern coming in a Birthing Pod deck, and the one in Legacy in a recurring Survival deck. It has only 1 Grand Prix Top 8 since 2009, and that was back in 2014, so this is another card whose position on the list could be at risk with the release of Guilds of Ravnica. At number 7, we have a card that showed up the last time we returned to Ravnica, and that's Voice of Resurgence. A control player's nightmare and an aggro player's dream, the voice basically makes all instants look really bad, as it will continually spit out creature tokens every time your opponent uses an instant on your turn. On top of that, the voice also makes a creature token when it dies. Basically, the voice is a creature that often feels like a must-kill for its game-warping power, but if you do kill it, it's going to leave value behind, especially if you try to do it at instant speed. It has seen a lot of play across multiple formats as a result of its ability to really frustrate control players. In block, it saw play in Selesnya aggro decks. It saw play in the standard version of that deck too, and in Naya aggro, and basically all the same decks that Selesnya Charm and Sigarda saw play in during that standard. Modern is where it has had the most success, though. Like Sigarda, it saw play in Birthing Pod and still sees play in its Descendants, where the fact that if it gave you value when you sacrificed it to the Birthing Pod to tutor something up made it really good. Abzan and Hate Bear decks have also played Voice of Resurgence more recently. At number 6, we have one of the best hate bears around, Gadok Teague. Gadok doesn't like it if you're trying to play big spells, and is a great way to shut down decks that are interested in doing that. He didn't see much play in block or standard, but he has seen a lot of play in Extended and its descendant, Modern. In Extended, he saw play in Zoo, Doran decks, and even Elves, where, despite not being an elf, he was worth running because the whole deck had such low converted mana cost. In the early days of Modern, he saw play in the Zoo decks, and more recently he's seen play in Bogles, Hate Bears, and Humans. Legacy has been where he's performed the best, though, where he's made appearances in Zoo, Maverick, Elves, and The Rock most frequently. At number 5, we have a card that, in addition to being green-white, specifically interacts with forests and plains, and that's Knight of the Reliquary. Helps you fix, thin out your deck, pull out utility lands, and more, all while making itself even bigger. The big thing is, it can search up any land card from your deck, not just basic lands. Despite all that power, it wasn't exactly a fixture in Standard or Extended, only managing a fairly meager 14 points in each of them. It has seen a good amount of play in non-rotating formats, though. In Modern Zoo decks near the beginning of the format, and more recently in Collected Company decks, which look to just play a bunch of powerful cheap creatures, but can also assemble some sweet combos, including one involving the Knight and Retreat to Coralhelm, which allows you to pull every single land out of your library and make the Knight huge. These days, Modern is where it sees the most play, but between 2010 and 2015, it put up 33 points in Legacy in a variety of decks, including Maverick, but also Stoneblade, The Rock, and of course, Zoo. At number 4, we have a card that was a mainstay in its Standard format, and that's Fleece Main Lion. Boasting already impressive stats as a 2-mana 3/3, this Lion also happens to make itself a little bigger and indestructible and hexproof in the later part of the game. This means it's a 2-drop that can become relevant even in the late game, and as a result, basically any aggressive deck touching green and white in the Standard format at the time was jamming 4 of these into their deck, and it was arguably the best 2-drop at the time. This included decks like Naya and Selesnya aggro, and after the release of Tarkir Block, the dreaded Abzan decks. This card has managed to get a pretty high spot on the list thanks to how heavily it was played in those days, not even missing a single Pro Tour top 8 the entire time it was in Standard. But it hasn't seen any play since rotating several years ago, and will slowly slip down this list as cards behind it continue to see play. At number 3, we have another 2-mana cat, Kasauli Pride Mage. Like the Lion, this is a 2-drop that is relevant all game long. In this case, probably more powerfully, thanks to the Exalted mechanic and the ability to disenchant something. It didn't see nearly as much play in Standard as the Lion did, only getting 12 points there, but it has gone on to be successful in several other formats. It actually didn't do a ton in Extended either, seeing play in Zoo and Elves, but after Extended was retired and Modern created in 2011, Kasauli Pride Mage really found a format to be effective in. In the early days of Modern, it saw play in that format's Zoo decks, but it would go on to thrive in Birthing Pod decks too, where it was the perfect kind of creature to tutor up since it came with such a valuable activated ability. Pod is actually also part of the reason the Pride Mage saw so much play, as it was an effective way to get rid of an opponent's Birthing Pod. This led to it seeing play in Abzan and Hate Bear decks as well, and since the banning of the Pod, it has continued to see play in decks running Collected Company or Court of Calling in place of the Pod. It also sees a lot of play in Legacy, including in that format's version of Zoo, and more recently in Maverick. At number 2, we have another modal card, this one, Dromoka's Command. This card was incredibly powerful in Standard and helped make Abzan decks as great as they were. It could serve as a ridiculously efficient removal spell or a way to remove enchantments, usually both at once, giving you a 2-for-1 most of the time when you cast it. Easily one of the most hated cards while it was legal in Standard. Keep in mind, this was a Standard that also had Collected Company. Dromoka's Command put up some pretty absurd numbers. Just for a few examples, it was in 11 of the top 16 decks at Grand Prix London in 2015, 5 of the top 8s at Grand Prix Indianapolis later that year, 5 of the top 8s at Grand Prix Minneapolis in 2016, and you get the picture. There were a lot of top 8s at Standard events at the time where half of the decks were running a full 4 of Dromoka's Command. In addition to Abzan, it was also found in Collected Company and Selesnya Tokens decks. It has recently started showing up in Modern in Bogles decks, where it is especially good since all the creatures in that deck have hexproof, so the fight effect on this card can't really be interacted with, so it can really effectively clear a blocker out of the way and let you smash with your heavily enchanted hexproof creature. As long as Bogles is relevant in Modern, it's probably safe to say that Dromoka's Command won't be completely idle on this list. And at number 1, we have a creature that costs hybrid mana in the Selesnya colors, and that is Kitchen Finks. Earlier we had Voice of Resurgence, the kind of card that makes a control player want to flip a table, and now we're at Kitchen Finks, the kind of card that makes an aggro player want to do that. The fact it can trade with 2 creatures while gaining you 4 life is excellent in those matchups, as those decks tend to run out of gas quickly, and the Finks can really slow those decks down. On the flip side, if you're an aggressive deck, you can also just play this and have it be an effective way to gain you life and get you ahead in a race. On top of all that, when combined with Malira, Sylvok Outcast, and our friend Birthing Pod and a Sacrifice Outlet, it allowed you to gain infinite life and instantly win the game. I know that combo sounds like a lot of cards, but Birthing Pod made it way too easy to assemble such a combo, and that's why it got banned. As a result of just being strong in a vacuum and being a key combo piece in one of the best modern decks ever, Kitchen Finks has a secure spot at number 1 on this list. Even before Birthing Pod existed, the Finks was seeing play based on how good it was on its own in both block and standard. Its most impressive showing was at Pro Tour Hollywood in 2008, where it was in 5 of the top 8 decks that included a pretty wide variety. Revel Arc Reanimator, a ramp deck, Green-Black Elves, Doron the Siege Tower, just a bunch of decks that could cast it. In Extended, it was seeing play alongside a lot of other creatures on this list in Zoo, as well as that format's varieties of Doran and Jund. However, the vast majority of the points it has earned, around 100 of them, have been in Birthing Pod decks and their descendants, which are powerful because they can just straight up win the game with efficient creatures that are difficult to deal with, like Kitchen Finks, while also operating on another axis when necessary, assembling an infinite life combo with the Finks. It's difficult to imagine any card but the Finks standing atop this list, even with all the new Selesnya cards that will be printed in the near future. Well, that does it for this week's MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, including looking at more Ravnica guilds in the coming weeks, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to make sure you get notified when I upload new content. Thanks for watching.